Sarah, can I just see one real quick thing on here? Can I just see the
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us today. We're on the menu. We're very excited you're here. Whether you're joining us in person or online, we're very excited and honored that you joined us here today for our Lunch and Learn. If you're new to On the Menu, we host this event monthly. We try to choose different topics and different speakers to really enrich our environment and the community that we grow here at Frontier RTP. My name is Sarah Beth Harris, and I work for Research Triangle Foundation, and one of my duties is to plan and run On the Menu. So, coming from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for coming today. Some other events that we have going on at Frontier are our Out of Office, which is a weekly happy hour. People love free alcohol, and we give 2 drinks to every person who comes. We have beer, wine, and non-alcoholic beverages. So feel free to join us every Thursday from 4:30 to 6:30 to network and meet some new people. One other event that we have weekly is our yoga. It's a great time to rest, relax, and start the week off new, and that happens on Tuesdays at 12 o'clock. But today, you're all here for On the Menu, and we are honored to be joined by Sophia, who is the co-founder and president of Sora Union, which is a really great mission to help those who are displaced find really great opportunities within the workforce. So please help me welcome her to the stage.
Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, sharing your lunch with me. I've been happy to be able to meet some of you, and I'm really grateful for you spending some time here. I didn't know there was a happy hour option. But in any case, glad to share lunch with you. What I thought we could do today, I've got some slides prepared that I can share with you. That we're going to start off just walking through my background very briefly. I think you've probably read about it in the announcement of this session. I'm also going to share a little bit with you about the background of Sora Union and how and why we founded it. We're going to talk about a couple of the problems that we're trying to solve with respect to the founding of Sora Union, and that's really related to displacement due to conflict and climate change, as well as the talent shortage, and we'll talk more about that. Then I'll talk a little bit about the future of work as a solution and the way that Sora Union is thinking about future of work and thinking about the solutioning to solve these problems. Then I'll share a bit about our services. And lastly, there will be some time for questions. And so I've got probably about 25 or 30 minutes of prepared remarks. And afterwards, there will definitely be time for questions. So please do jot them down. So let's start off with my intro. Just to give you a little bit of my background. I have over 2 decades of experience in the financial services industry, and primarily in roles around operations, human capital, and regional management. Most recently, I was the head of Credit Suisse Raleigh, which is the US Tech and Operations hub here in RTP. So I was a very close neighbor for some time. It's so much fun to be back on this campus and see how it's evolved since then. But I left Credit Suisse a couple years ago to start Sora Union with 2 of my co-founders. And Sora Union, as you'll hear more about, we are a globally distributed professional services company. And I'll tell you more about our services in just a minute. But first, let me tell you a little bit about, before I tell you about what we do, I want to tell you a little bit about why we do it and how we got to this point. So it really started probably about 3 years ago. And as they say, it started with a walk in the park. And in fact, it wasn't a park. It was the fantastically lush forest, the Ozarks, in Bentonville, Arkansas, in and around the Crystal Bridges Museum. And so picture it, there's streams and foliage and just absolute natural beauty, and really this picturesque backdrop for human habitability. And so the conversation really centered around two seemingly unrelated themes. The first theme was we had just come out of the pandemic. We had just learned about how to work remotely, and that in fact, remote work works. And not only does remote work work, especially in the knowledge work space, we could actually find great advantages from doing that. And so this theme was really around what's the future of distributed work look like, and how do we make sure that we're tapping into it to kind of leverage what was kickstarted during the pandemic. And then the second, again, seemingly unrelated, was how is the world going to deal with this looming crisis of climate change? The numbers continue to soar as far as individuals impacted by climate change. And somebody had just referenced how timely this discussion is based on what we're seeing with our neighbors in the western part of our state as a result of the hurricane last week, which is traumatic and tragic on so many levels. So really, like, how is the world going to prepare for that, and how are we going to respond to that, and hopefully kind of get ready so that we can respond in a very proactive way. So the more these two themes came up, the more we realized that actually they weren't as separate as we initially thought. And so really led us to questions like, could the superpowers of distributed work that we all became very familiar with during the pandemic, could we use those to provide opportunities to people who really needed them? And so a lot of people, when they think of distributed work, think about the opportunity to work from the beach in the summer, skiing mountains in the winter, and that's all great. But in fact, how could we take distributed work further and really use it to address a serious challenge, which is that of displacement? Could we build a company that could support and empower these people to continue to build their careers in the face of displacement, continue to reach their potential and do meaningful work? And could we provide this fulfilling work to them in a way that provided them stability that they may not have otherwise? And then lastly, could we do all of this while also providing companies with access to this tremendous talent that they otherwise wouldn't have access to? And so as you can imagine, we were inspired by these conversations, by these really big challenges, but we were really driven also by the urgency around them. The urgency not to forget what we learned during the pandemic, but also not to be blinded by what's coming ahead. So in fact, that's what we did. We built Sora Union, and Sora Union launched in March of 2022. We are a globally distributed professional services company. We offer services in design, engineering, QA, localization, and recruiting as a service. So let's talk a little bit more about these two problems, this crisis of displacement, and the other problem that we're really trying to solve as well is the skilled talent shortage. And what we're finding, and we'll talk about that in just a second, we're finding that continues to be a challenge in many parts of the world. Before I flip to the next slide that gives you a little bit more information, I also just want to point out a nuance about, again, those conversations back at Crystal Bridges that were really centered around climate change. As I mentioned, we launched in March of 2022. Shortly before, as you know, is when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it became exceptionally evident to us that our timing could not be a coincidence. We needed to do something about that and expand our thesis to include conflict and climate change displacement. And really, while the impetus of each of those displacements may be different right now, in the long term, if you think about it, if you think about climate change eventually impacting food source, water source, creating droughts, creating loss of jobs, that will create conflict. And so in fact, at some point they will be interrelated, even more so than they are today. So you might hear me talk somewhat interchangeably about the two, but understand that we started with this thought of displacement by climate change and broadened it in response to not only what we saw then, but only more evident by events that we've seen since then. So let's talk a bit about this growing crisis of displacement. As I mentioned, we've broadened the topic to include conflict. What this slide shows is that as of the end of last year, there were an estimated 120 million people that have been displaced due to conflicts that we're in some instances aware of, like Ukraine. And of course, those numbers will have grown over the last 11 months in the Mideast as well. But also some that maybe we're less familiar with, and I wasn't as familiar, but civil war in Ethiopia that is causing a tremendous amount of internal displacement. And so individuals that have to leave their villages and go to another village, that's absolutely, as you can imagine, that's disruptive for a significant number of reasons. What I'll point out is, yes, the numbers, as I said, have grown to 120 million. Look where they were a decade ago. They've doubled, over doubled, and they're just continuing to increase. So then let's talk about climate change. It's predicted that climate change is going to impact 3 to 4 billion people by 2070 in countries that will not be able to support that displacement. And so while we're very aware of the natural disaster impact based on incidents of the last week, there's also, as I mentioned, drought, shortage of food, coastal flooding. We've also seen that in our state of recent. It's happening in a lot of different parts of the world, though. This illustration, though, shares the climate niche, or the temperature niche. And what this is depicting is that in the darker shaded orange and the very dark areas in the middle, again, primarily in the global south, is where temperatures are going to continue to increase. And those temperatures where it's the dark shaded area, those temperatures will rise to Sahara Desert-like levels, which means that people won't be able to live there year round, which means they'll need to move and they'll be displaced. So then on the flip side of this challenge is the talent shortage. And this is, again, data as of the end of last year, but it will tell us that almost 4 out of 5 employers are stating the ability to find, access, and recruit talent to fill the jobs that they have is one of their biggest challenges. And so clearly there's this opportunity to find both of these problems and find a solution in the middle, which is exactly what Sora Union is doing. So let's talk about the future of work as a solution. I bet if I asked every single one of you in the room and on the phone what the future of work is, I'm guessing your answers would be similar, but probably different in a couple different ways. So let's just level set and be really simplistic about the definition, which is that the future of work is a projection of how workers in the workplace will evolve in the coming years. And so if we think about that, what does that mean? It means how are we going to find the talent that we're looking for, but it also means how are we going to work with that talent. So at Sora Union, again, we are a globally distributed professional services company. And we believe that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And we want to change that. And so our role is to gather and organize highly skilled people who are displaced or at risk of displacement. And for those individuals to provide services to our customers. And there are a tremendous amount of benefits that I'll tell you about in a couple of minutes around why that makes sense for our customers. But first, let me just share with you that this is a map that shows the teammates that we've grown to 50 teammates over the last 2.5 years. We are located in 20 different countries, 13 different time zones. We've got customers in 4 different countries as well. But what you'll see is this creates a tremendous opportunity for our customers as far as what our breadth is, as far as where we're located, and the kind of the follow the sun model, if you will. You'll also note, just to point out, you'll also note that, again, that idea of global south, and then you'll see also in and around Ukraine has been a pretty significant focus area for us as well. And so let's talk a second about the people. And for me, this has been the most rewarding part about what I've done for the last 2.5 years. I'd actually probably argue and say that the last 2 decades working with people is what I've loved most. But what's different about this experience is look how diverse this group is. This is just a snapshot of our teammates. Look at the diversity from where they come from. It's so hard to replicate in any other setting the ability to work with people from so many different places. And so not only does that provide me with a tremendous richness of what they bring to the table, but imagine what that provides to our customers. So I'm sure many of you in this room have been either tasked with or on your own looked to staff diverse teams. And we can all spend a ton of time talking about the business case for diversity, but hopefully we can all agree that there is a business case for diversity. It's hard to build and it's hard to retain. Whereas while working with Sora Union, our customers just immediately are able to tap into this richness. And so that is, interestingly enough, not something that we necessarily set out to provide. It wasn't, as I mentioned when I talked about some of the challenges, we didn't set out to provide access to diverse teams to our customers, but in fact, as a byproduct of our model, that's exactly what we've done. I mentioned that Ukraine is we have a strong presence in Ukraine, and of Ukrainians. It's about 23% of our team are Ukrainians, and some of which are still in Ukraine for lots of different reasons, and some have left. Some have left and come back and left again, and throughout that entire time, they've been able to maintain stability of income and flexibility of location. And there are incredible examples of the resilience, and I'm going to talk about resilience a little bit more in a minute. But some of these individuals have fled through Moldova to escape Ukraine, been offered jobs when they've got 15 years of experience in a certain specialty, offered jobs cleaning offices or making coffee. That's not, as we all know, that's not an anomaly to Ukrainians. That's really immigrants in general. And so clearly it's something that we want to be able to offer individuals, as I said, this ability to continue to build their careers, continue to do meaningful work, but also access to them, because we're in a much better place having access to somebody with 15 years experience in something doing that than having them do something that's very different than what their skill set has built them to do. So again, and I mentioned, so around 23% of Ukrainians, our next largest kind of concentration, if you will, are Nigerians and in Nigeria. And if you think back to that temperature niche slide that I shared, not only is Nigeria right there in kind of the very concentrated space where the heat temperature is going to rise to a really dangerous level, but it's also really densely populated. And so again, this ability to offer individuals jobs that they can have that they can take with them is really key. And so then let's talk a bit about the future of work as a solution. So again, future of work is about projecting and then hopefully kind of acting on things that we can anticipate. A lot of what we've talked about already, though, we're already seeing. So starting off with the adapting to the change in the future of work, what I'm seeing, and I've spent much of my career in the human capital space, and so I'm very attuned to a lot of the challenges that companies are having with hybrid workforce and also with this return to office mandate that many are attempting because their hybrid working is not working for them. And I've learned that in fact, it's not working because you're still working with the old principles, assuming that those principles are going to work in a new model. And so the biggest learning I've had around the future of work, which by the way, should really call the present of work, because the future just is happening right now and we need to be adapting now rather than waiting. But this idea that we can't assume, and I can't assume that the way I worked for 25 years in the financial services industry is going to be how I'm going to be working in a distributed workspace. Trust me, I tried it in the beginning and it doesn't work. And so I've needed to get really comfortable with that, but also kind of use a blank slate. Now, I'm not suggesting that for established companies, that's easy because they're changing a huge paradigm. It's a huge paradigm shift for them and they're kind of moving a ship. But for Sora Union, we had the ability to do that from the start. And so we were able to build what we always anticipate to be a globally distributed model with processes and principles that support that. And so moving to that distributed work model, there are a few things that we have done. I think so when we think about future of work, there are a couple of big things that we can talk about. One is around this distributed work model, and I'll talk about that more. Another is around technology. And so I would say both of those areas are how we've adapted. I think that not only, like I said, has COVID kind of led a really important pathway around the concept of distributed work, but the advancements in AI have also clearly made a significant impact on how we can see the future. And at Sora Union, we are certainly leveraging AI. There are a couple examples I can share. One is that we are building AI capability that allows us not only to match what our customer needs are with our skill sets, also identify where those gaps are, also understand where we're seeing trends. A lot of data that, of course, we have, but AI allows us to process that data in a much faster way than humans could and give us really information to make informed decisions. So that's one example. Another example where we're using AI is within our applicant tracking system. And this is, we've had almost 25,000 applications for our 50 jobs. Probably not even 50 because we probably didn't post a lot of the early ones. But that's incredible. I don't know how many people in here are familiar with the recruiting space, but 25,000 applicants for 50 jobs is really significant. That being said, we use an AI platform to be able to kind of weed through those, make sure that we understand where the best skill sets are for our needs, to be able to then make the right decisions, not only for our hiring our own talent, but also when we're sourcing for our customers. So that's on the technology front. There's two examples. And clearly, we're using all of the other communication platforms that allow us to partner and work in a distributed way and still maintain a ton of efficiency. And that really takes me to this concept of asynchronous work. I'll admit that, again, working in financial services, which doesn't tend to be on the forefront of modern workspaces, asynchronous and synchronous work was a new concept to me when I started Sora Union with my co-founders. And I really had to learn and understand exactly what it meant. And synchronous is what we're doing now. We're all together at the same time, whether we're in the same room or not, we're all sharing time together. Asynchronous means that we're not doing this. We're working on our own time. We might be collaborating on a document. And in our model where we've got lots of time zones, it means that we are really leveraging this follow the sun model where work continues to happen all night long. That, though, means that we've had to put in place some things that allow us to do that. And so we put in place principles. As I mentioned earlier, you need to kind of start off with a clean slate around how you're going to develop something like this. And it doesn't mean that established companies couldn't do this, but it's really reshaping your principles. One of the principles is that we're a writing first culture. And so we don't pop in an office. We couldn't do that. We don't jump on the phone to solve something. We really write it first. But even more so from a writing culture perspective, we also have a very strong documentation process. And this is intentional because we want to make sure that we're transparent with what our processes are, for example, what our information is that we want our teammates to know about. We don't want somebody to have to wait until I wake up in the morning in order for them to get information that's going to help them do their job. And so we have created really strong process around how we share information with our team. As you can imagine, we also have a number of languages spoken, primary languages spoken. As a company, English is our primary language, but out of the 50 teammates we have, there are only 2 of us, myself and one of my co-founders, where English is our native language. And so, again, proficiency of English is very strong across our team, but it's not the first language, which means that it's important for us to record calls, record our all hands, document things again, because people understand and are able to reference things differently, especially when it's not their first language. And so again, these are other principles that we've done. We also, for our video recordings, we do closed captioning, again, because some people hear, read, and listen to information a little differently. So that's the distributed work model. The next is this concept of resilience. And I've talked to a couple people in the room here today. And in fact, it seems like this was a drawing point for some, which I love to hear, because I think it's so exciting to that people are thinking about this concept of resilience. This, again, is to some extent an unintended advantage of the model that we built. I don't think that we anticipated, again, back in that walk at Crystal Bridges, that the benefit of working with displaced people was that we would also be able to leverage a tremendous amount of resilience. And that resilience doesn't just come with their own resilience and the excellent work they're doing, but it also is then transferred over to our customers, and they have access to that resilience. I could tell you countless stories about our teammates and some of the really challenging situations that they found themselves in. And oftentimes, I think people assume that those challenging situations would create a distraction from their work and impede their work. And in fact, it's been the opposite. We have really found that our teammates have been are so driven by not only the mission, but also our commitment to them around the stability of their income and our ability to offer them this flexibility of location. There is a tremendous pride in what they're doing. And that pride is not just around what we're offering to them, it's what they're able to accomplish as well. And so I've got, again, stories of our Ukrainian teammates, whether they're working in shelters or whether they're working in without heat. And again, I could tell you tons of stories around this, that their ability to continue to work in that type of environment, not because we're mandating them to, by the way, we are very flexible and empathetic with their ability to work when they are able and accommodate what life throws at them. But again, they're finding this as a way to continue with some normal life in what's otherwise really not a normal space for them. And so that has definitely been something that not dissimilar to the diversity topic, but again, we didn't go out looking for it, but we found it, and we sure are lucky that we did. And then that goes back to the building a strong, diverse team. I spent some time on this already with the flag slide, so I won't repeat everything I said then. But again, it's something that we just didn't anticipate being such a strong byproduct of our model. And it's something that our customers are really finding extremely valuable to them. Think about, just even one example is, think about a global company that is looking to create a website. I would argue, and actually I wouldn't just argue, I could evidence that the outcome of a design pod where somebody is in Nigeria, somebody is in Ukraine, and somebody is in Venezuela, the outcome of that product is going to be so much more superior than if all of them had lived in North Carolina, for example. Not that we don't do fantastic work in North Carolina, but we don't have this different lived experiences, different perspectives to bring to that project. And so again, when I talk about different, and whether that's a website or whether that's a logo or whatnot, that's a real value. So then I want to talk a little bit about our services. I mentioned these very briefly before. We started with design, and design really is in both the brand and the product space. And so whether it is designing a brand, designing a logo, auditing a brand, make sure that it's still fresh, refreshing it, designing a website, designing any kind of collateral or decks or fact sheets that our customers need. This is what our design team does. We also have an engineering team, and this is a software engineering team. And so not only are our teammates able to build, for example, the websites that are designed by the design team, but they're also able to support our customers where they have software that they've developed or are working to develop, that we've been able to work with them to support that. And also database management and various different other engineering concepts that we've been able to support our customers with. Localization, again, if you think about a global company or even a local company that's looking to reach a broader audience, our team is able to translate, but not just translate the words, but also make sure that the meaning is maintained and continues to resonate in the materials. And so our localization team is able to do that. We've got a QA engineering team that doesn't just partner with our engineering team to ensure quality of the products that we're developing, but also in many instances is actually working with our customers directly to QA their own software that they've developed on their own. And that has also been a successful service for us. And then most recently, we launched recruiting as a service. And this was an interesting, it's different, as you can tell from the other four, but this came out of two things. One is a lot of conversations with, again, our customers saying, listen, I need XYZ. Can you do that for us? We said, well, that's not one of our services, but we can help you find somebody. And the reason we said we can help you find somebody is because we were able to evidence for ourselves how well we were able to source and assess and place talent for Sora Union. Why not offer that same service for our customers? And so we're able to do it in our target markets for us and in our customers' target markets for them. So these are the services we continue to, we grew to 5 services very quickly. And we actually had to kind of slow down how we were doing that because we wanted to make sure that we continue to be really strong and provide quality in the services that we were offering. But there are so many opportunities to not only respond to our customer needs, but also with talent out there that we can attract. And then as far as our customers, this is just a snapshot again of some of our customers. You'll see that we have grown from, we have customers that are everywhere from startup all the way to enterprise. And you'll see also that there is a strong concentration here of financial services as well as health tech. And that's intentional. They both seem to be places that we felt like we had really good traction. And so while they're not the only industries that we support, they're definitely, from a go-to-market perspective, they were some industries that felt really not only beneficial for us, but where we could also be beneficial for them with our services. So with that, I guess before I turn it over to Q&A, one thing that I would just mention is that we certainly, and as you can tell, this was not a sales pitch. That's a very different deck and a very different delivery. But we would absolutely love to engage with any of you if you have companies or work with companies where you have any of the needs for the services that I referenced. Would love to speak with you about those. Would love to speak with you more about what we do. But in the meantime, why don't I take any questions that the group might have? Yes.
First, I was going to say, you mentioned you didn't know there was a happy hour option. I'd be very happy to have you speak at a happy hour.
That's very nice of you.
So for my first question as a precursor, just so I understand clearly, does your company both hire displaced workers and also act as a recruiter for displaced workers? Is that accurate?
We hire displaced workers to work for Sora Union to deliver Sora Union services, which are the 4 services, the first 4 services. We also, because we recruit for ourselves, we also source talent for other companies, but they don't have to be displaced people. They can be in their target markets. But it's a great question, and it's not a new question. Just to repeat for those on the line, the question was whether or not we source displaced people for us and displaced people for our customers, or how does that work? And so hopefully I answered that. Of course, we would love to source displaced or at-risk people for our customers. It's not always what their business model supports.
So on a follow-up, I'm curious to know when they're displaced, how do you make sure they have the resources to do the work? Because you even mentioned something as simple as heat. I would think much
Yeah.
less getting a stable internet connection.
Yeah.
And if they can't do it like we have the luxury in our home or hybrid where they have to go to a location, how do you find to work something like that out, which is for something that's very good, but comes with serious challenges?
Yeah. Great question. The question for those on the line is, how do we make sure that individuals in the face of these challenges have the resources they need to actually deliver? This goes back to the resilience point. It is incredible to see the hoops that people will go through to make sure that they have what they need to do this work that they're doing. And again, it is not because we don't give them flexibility, because we absolutely do. And empathy is one of our 4 sets of values. And the purpose of empathy being one of the 4 sets of values that's really the foundation of our company is because we understand that life throws things at people. And to be honest, life is throwing things at people that I can't imagine, and I'm guessing people in this room probably have a hard time imagining as well. And so we absolutely offer that, and that's part of the reason that we work off of a pod model, which means that at any given point, if somebody goes offline, somebody else is able to pick that up. And so I think that to really succinctly answer your question, it's that we've got contingency plans in place where that happens. But so far, we've had few instances where somebody has completely dropped the ball, and we haven't been able, actually, I can't think of one where we haven't been able to pick up the ball, but I also can't think of many where somebody's like, yeah, sorry, I can't do that. Yes.
Distributed model, are all your employees full-time employees, or are you gonna someday go full distributed where you work on a project and it's so a project ends and ebbs and flows? So, then you can have more flexibility and not have the 40-hour week kind of restriction that you put on that.
Yeah. Yeah, another great question. So our teammates are all full-time. We have not gone to a modified kind of work week. Actually, that's not true. We have 2 that have returned from having babies, and they are at a 50%. So actually, we have done that. That being said, one of the things that we are really keen to continue to explore is how can we offer more flexibility to people who may not want to be full-time. And where we're trying to balance that is this also idea of us providing stability of income to people. And so for that reason, we have leaned towards the full-time idea, but eventually we may be in a place, and I anticipate we'll grow to a place as we do grow, where we have people that are kind of more in those kind of slices of time rather than full-time. Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So the question was, how did we come up with the name Sora Union? And I love this answer. I just think it's, and again, it was our design team that was really integral in this. But Sora means sky in Japanese. And so if you think about when people are displaced, everything changes. The cityscape changes, the landscape changes, the language, the culture, everything that's familiar to them changes. The sky remains constant. And so that's where Sora Union, and Union is just kind of this concept of this global community. Yes.
I'm having a little bit hard time comprehending 2 facts that you noted. One is 80% of the companies have hard time finding the skilled talent. But then the other fact, when you have 50 jobs, you have 25,000 applicants. Is it the company's not able to find the talent because they're unwilling to pay? And the reason you have 25K applicant is because you opened it global.
So the question is this concept of 80% of companies having a hard time finding talent, yet we've had such success in getting applicants. Well, really good answer for that is that the companies with a hard time finding talent are fishing in the same pond, and that pond has been depleted of talent, whereas what we're doing is fishing from a much bigger pond. And because of our distributed model, we're sourcing in places that a lot of traditional companies that you or I would think about having challenges, they're not sourcing there.
why do you think the companies, for example, companies in the US are not looking in the bigger pond? Is because of the regulations issues, geographic issues? Are they they're not trying to change their work culture?
Yeah, I think it's structural. I think it's there's a cultural element to it. I think it's what they've always known. I think that there are some companies that definitely set up kind of locations in other places where they have more success finding talent because they haven't found it in, for example, New York. But that being said, there's still this idea that we have of going so broad. And again, 50 teammates, 20 different countries. Like I don't know another company that has that type of kind of landscape. That's just not a model that I think when you're working in starting in such a large place, trying to move that ship culturally, I just don't think it's something that they've necessarily tapped into yet. Yes. So our teammates, as you can imagine, we're not employer of records in each of these 20 places as such a small, as such a early stage company. So we have contractors, but yes, they are all on full-time income. And this means that we pay them regardless of their utilization. And again, that goes back to this concept of stability that they will, if somebody, for example, was not able to work for 3 days because they had no electricity, no heat, no internet, et cetera, we wouldn't not pay them for that time. Because again, our concept is to provide the stability of financial stability to them. And so they are all paid on a monthly rate. Yeah.
Situations where, you're being empathetic to the situation. You had situations where the amount of compassion and flexibility was so drawn out that you had to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah. The question is whether or not the need for empathy has exceeded kind of our tolerance for empathy, maybe. We haven't yet. I can't think of one instance where that has happened. I wouldn't, no, I can't think of an instance where there was a need for accommodation and it was too much of a need for us. I can think of instances where performance has been a challenge and we've had to manage that just like any other company would, but not where there was a need that we couldn't support. Yes.
How do you manage the pay structure? You're based in the US and your workers are global. And if you look at the same skill set, the country local salaries are different. So how do you align them all?
So also really interesting about Sora Union is we pay a global rate, and that rate is based on the value of the work you're doing, not your location. And so that means that our designers, our level 1 designers in Nigeria are making the same as our level 1 designers in Ukraine, and they're paid on US dollar. Yes.
This is, first of all, I love the concept of the company. And as a Venezuelan, someone who grew up in Venezuela, I can only imagine that there has to be some kind of threshold that your potential talent has to meet, structurally speaking, for them to be a good fit. So I'm just thinking along that line, payment. Have you come across someone who's amazing at what they can bring to the table, but they don't have a bank account in the US? Or how would you process that payment?
Yeah. So we process payments to their local banks, and clearly there are kind of some challenges to that, but we've worked around those challenges with various other payment structures that are all obviously compliant. But we have yet to have an issue where we wanted to, I mean, people find a way to make that work. And again, it's all compliant, but there are certainly challenges, particularly in parts of Latin America.
And that you find the ways.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a success story. I mean, there's got to be so many stories of struggle. You mentioned Ukraine, Nigeria, that you can tell and say, this is why we do what we do, or
Yeah.
it's a struggle that makes it worth it.
All right, so the question is for a success story. So our first teammate, her name is Ksenia, and Ksenia has about 10, probably by this point, maybe more like 12 years of experience as a translator. And she also has medical background. Ksenia is the individual I referenced that was fleeing Ukraine through Moldova with her younger sibling and her mother through the woods. Got to Moldova, was living on the kindness of strangers in a spare room in somebody's home. Through that time, through a network, kind of found somebody who knew about what Sora Union was building. And this was very early on. She was our first teammate. And we brought her on board as our first teammate and our obviously first localization expert. So Ksenia was not only able to leave this, spare room, which again, the kindness of strangers is tremendous in instances like this. She was able to seek housing that was not only better located, but also much more comfortable for her and her mother and her sibling than what's otherwise offered to refugees. And so she was able to continue working with us, continue providing this excellent service to our customers, again, because of her ability to get herself set up a lot faster than a lot of other refugees are able to get set up. So that's a success story in my opinion, but the story doesn't stop there. In addition, Ksenia speaks many different languages, one of which is Japanese. And Ksenia was able to apply for a program that allowed her visa status in Japan. And so Ksenia moved to Japan, which is a lifelong dream of hers. And she continues to work with us from Japan in that same capacity, never being interrupted throughout that time. So it's hard to, that's a pretty good one. Are there questions on the line? Okay, great. Yes.
What are some challenges companies face when they are starting to transition to kind of like a wider network in their field? Like in terms of using the recruiting service?
Transition.
Like if they're starting to search for that resources outside.
Okay. Okay. So I think just logistics is challenging, just how and where to find talent. Oftentimes I get asked that question, where do you source talent? And we source it exactly like everybody else does. We post jobs, we post it on LinkedIn, we post it on job boards. There are various different Facebook pages for different communities. We post it there. So I think that one is just kind of understanding that you have access to it. It's just you have to shift your model a tiny bit, but otherwise it's very similar. I think what we've also found is that assessing that talent is very similar as well. We use an online assessment program to assess technical skills. That's been really helpful. Language is always going to be a component for a company where that's required. At some point, we actually hope for English not to be a requirement. We hope that AI will allow us down the road to be able to actually bring people on board that are not as proficient in English so that we can still be able to support a broader population. But in the meantime, that's probably also another challenge. And then it's just also the logistics of kind of getting it set up and paid and all of the things. These are really good questions. Anybody else have any others? All right. Well, I'll stick around for a few minutes. Would love to speak with any of you with any additional questions. Also, if you want more information, one thing that I didn't reference is that a lot of examples of this work that we do can be found on our website. So I encourage you to take a look. You'll see a lot of the showcase of samples of our work there. And also, if you're interested in learning more or potentially partnering with your company and some of the services that we provide, or even just learning more about it, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.